So welcome everyone. And today's conversation is one that genuinely means a lot to me. Not just because of the topic, but because of the two people joining me here in this podcast. Fred comes from the world of venture and founding. He's lived the pattern recognition side of early stage building, the scar tissue of being a founder, and the responsibility of deploying capital with conviction. And then we have Shafi, welcome as well. He comes from a completely different universe, clinical work, systems thinking, understanding how healthcare actually behaves in the real world, with all its incentives, frictions, and complexity. And it's precisely the combination of those two perspectives that, venture intuition and clinical realism that makes the partnership so compelling in my eyes. So today I want to walk through that story, how the two of you came together, what Purpose Tech taught you, and why Purpose Tech Capital looks the way it does, and how this strategy fits the moment we're in right now. So let's start at the foundation, the partnership. From where I sit, the complementarity between the two of you is unusually strong. So Fred, can you maybe tell us a little bit of the background of how you two actually met?
Yeah, so I can give my side of the story, and then Shafi, feel free to chip in. So we have had our first fund for about 2.5, 3 years, right? And since the beginning of this year, we started working on our fund 2, which is kind of very similar in many ways, but also rather different in some details, which we'll probably discuss later. And what we clearly understood that we have some competency gaps in the team that we would like to fill in to be able to embark on the thesis of the Fund 2. So starting January, together with Rado, we were exploring ways how we can talk to interesting people, just have conversations. So I think we spoke over 70, 80, like very senior experts, professionals, people that have great knowledge when it comes to HealthTech. And with Shafi, we had the best conversations from my point of view. So I was very impressed by Shafi's competence, but also overall understanding. And also, I think we kind of clicked on the personal level. And we started talking more, exploring, and then around summer of this year, we started exploring the idea of working together on the Fund 2. And yeah, fast forward, that's where we are right now, with Shafi joining us as senior partner for the Fund 2, which is super exciting. So that's a short story, but yeah, it has been a year in the making. Yeah. What's your take on that, Shafi?
So yeah, I'm super excited to join you, Fred, in this journey. And my recollection, of course, is that I think you got in touch through a LinkedIn message, from what I remember. You often get lots of messages. Most are ignored, as I'm sure you realise. Excuse me. But this sounded really genuinely interesting. Fred reached out and said, hey, we're doing this. Would you be interested in having a conversation? I think more than that, really. So I replied and reached out, and we had a conversation. And obviously, a lot of us get a lot of inbound traffic on areas that we can support companies in, roles that we might consider. So the question for me, what was this that stood out? First of all, I think it was the brutal honesty from Fred about what he was trying to do. We finally actually spoke. I love the fact that he was trying to create a business, a company to support health tech globally. And also he mentioned the two words that mean a lot to me. And those two words were having impact and leaving a legacy. And for someone of my age now, who are towards the end of their career, you start thinking about what do you leave behind. I've been in healthcare for over 30 years now as a doctor. I've seen health systems globally. So now the question is, how do we impact healthcare in a different way? From our learnings, from our experience in building companies, in supporting companies, working with governments, working with NGOs, and working across the world, understanding the challenges facing healthcare systems globally. So the other thing that I think that really connected us was our outlook on global health. We weren't just interested in one particular area, although obviously Fred is focused on Central and Eastern Europe, and I'm based in the UK. We both share the compassion of improving global standards of access, equity, and access to affordable healthcare. That resonated. And we both had this outlook that we were both global citizens, I think, which also captured my imagination, that we thought way outside barriers, outside boundaries of countries. And so we had the same share of humanity. So that in itself was, for me, an amazing signal that this could be the right opportunity for both of us. And so it's those kind of conversations we're having that connect us in a much more deeper fashion. He told me about his Purpose Tech 1 fund, which was very successful, and he had the right ideas. And his maneuvering to more health tech made a lot of sense, given the experience as an entrepreneur, as a founder, and now in investment. From my own experience, again, I built companies over the course of the last 10 years. I've been in coalition for 32 years. It seemed like a really natural, good fit. But obviously, it's about human contact. It's about the conversation. It's about the connection. I felt we connected really well together. And then we brought different skill sets to the table, completely different skill sets. And also, we opened a much bigger and wider network for the ultimate evolution of Purpose Tech 2.
So yeah, thanks for Shafi. Let's dissect it a little bit more. So you set the context for PT Capital, so the Fund 2 a little bit, and I want to move back a little bit to the first chapter of the story, being Purpose Tech, so the Fund 1. And I think that the first fund is always kind of like the truth serum, right? That reveals strengths, limit assumptions. Some of those hold, some of those don't survive the contact with reality. And I think the insights from Purpose Tech, from Fund 1, are what makes the Fund 2, so PT Capital, actually possible, right? So Fred, let's start maybe with you. Looking back at Purpose Tech, what were the most important learnings or unexpected insights that you extracted from this period, from this?
Yeah, so there has been a lot, right? It has been now 3 years in the making, but it just feels like much longer that we have been, in this. So currently we see, I think, a little over 1,200 startups per year, right? So that's pretty decent number for a first fund like us, and we also see 99% of what is happening in our verticals in the Fund 1, beyond health tech. It's also climate tech and future of work. So we see 99%, right? So there's maybe like 2 or 3 startups that have raised that we have not seen in our verticals in the region. So there's quite some interesting visibility. I think one of the main things that we observed, and that's kind of the foundation for the Fund 2, PT Capital, is that there are many talented teams, particularly in health tech. So out of our deal flow, it is roughly about 8%, so 8-10%. So we have seen anything between like a little over 200 teams so far. And they're very talented. They're going after markets that are attractive, i.e. you can make profit pretty quickly. You can break even. There's money on the table. But those markets are limited, right? So there are markets in maybe higher tens of millions of euros, maybe lower hundreds of millions of euros. And we have seen many of those teams that are like really good. So clinically good, business, marketing good. Going around the market and trying to raise capital and failing, right? Not raising the money. We also saw many of them. The main reason for that is the constraints of the healthcare markets as such and the dynamics of those markets, right? So it's very difficult for many reasons, fragmentation, remuneration, regulation, to make a hockey stick in health tech, right? And many of the companies that we saw that did raise, they were pursuing this exponential growth, but because this is so hard to do in healthcare, vast majority of those companies have either failed or we see them struggling heavily, and they will probably fail because healthcare is not set up for these hockey sticks, right? So that's what and of course that frustrated us a little bit, right? Because we're like, okay, we see all those good teams, we would love to back them, but we simply cannot. So that was one of the key insights for us for the Fund 2, right? So how can we structure our strategy and our approach to be able to back all those great teams that kind of nobody seems to be interested in, even though vast majority of people realize that the teams are quality, but just the markets are small, right? Because the majority of investors, particular VCs, would be chasing the unicorns, right, or the decacorns currently. So that's kind of the core insight for us right now, right? And how can we enable and seed those companies so they can start? They don't have to bootstrap. Basically, their second best option is to bootstrap. So how can we seed them so they can become profitable faster? And how can they grow sustainably, organically, and to be very large? Not maybe unicorns, not maybe in 8 years, but further down the line, 10, 15 years, be just entrenched in the markets, be profitable, and kind of control the markets, right? Which is super interesting financially. What's your take on that, Shafi? What do you kind of see?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that you've done well is rethink the model. Having experience with your first fund is what would work going forward, especially in health. Health is very nuanced, as you know, I'm sure you realise. It's not easy vertical to be in. It has its challenges. And you have to understand, how does health systems work? What brings a lot to the table? And how do you make a company viable and profitable long term? It's a busy market, as you know, very competitive. A lot of technologies are coming in, a lot of ideas and solutions for essentially a broken, fragmented healthcare system around the world. So the way you're positioning Purpose Tech to fund, from experience, is the right way. It's not as aggressive as VCs. We want to nurture people, build teams, and sustainable solutions so that there's impact long term, supporting the journey of those founders into healthcare systems to provide patients better outcomes and better experiences. So I think the way you're thinking about it, from an entrepreneur's perspective, is very supportive. It makes sense. You're nurturing, supporting a group of people who are great founders, but need some support from business acumen, deliver sales, marketing, and to deploy and scaling up. But not in the way that's a hockey stick, as you mentioned. Everyone's concerned about the exponential growth. We want to be fast, we want to be quick. It's break hard, break fast kind of things we think about. I think that is long gone now. How can you build things organically in a way that's more incremental rather than exponential, but has impact in the real world of medicine, showing that we can use these solutions, but deploy them over a longer period of time, making it more sustainable. We want companies and people that work with us to create solutions that have impact for long term, that get ingrained into the healthcare system, supporting either the patient journey, supporting clinicians in terms of their outcomes, also supporting practices or hospital systems, so that they see the kind of the impact that it generates. Also, they can see that for long term with remuneration, remodels of reimbursement, so they understand this better. Coming from your perspective and understanding what that's required, from my healthcare years of experience, it makes absolute sense to me. We've been in the space for a long time, Fred, you and I, and we've seen a lot of companies just fail because the expectation is to go as fast as possible. And sometimes that is just not possible in healthcare because, as I said before, it's nuanced. And secondly, we see them failing and we see them with good ideas, but not getting support they need. So I think one of the things that we talked about a lot is how do we add value to a business? It's not just capital. It's the mentorship, it's the support, structure around them so they succeed organically. That's what we like about Purpose Tech and what you've created. It's that much more holistic approach to investments that will offer much more of a long-term approach and create a network and I guess a kind of a connection with founders and the investors that make much more sense. There's more synergy, there's more support. And I think that way you're likely to be more successful and get the best out of the founders and the teams that we support.
There's an interesting, by the way, I think a kind of a parallel in my mind, and that is that, of course, in healthcare nowadays, there's a lot of talk about like longevity and health span, right? But I think many of the players in the ecosystem, they forget about longevity of the companies in healthcare, right? Because you have to be around for a long time. You have to be credible. I mean, we're talking people's health, people's lives, right? We cannot just go and, break things, right? I think that's at the core of healthcare, which you would know so much more as a surgeon, right? But I think this is one of the key things that we want to focus on, right? We still want the companies to grow, be very profitable, make a lot of money for themselves and for us and our investors. But there is this health span question that I think needs a different approach, and that approach is not a hockey stick.
Yeah, we should change the word from health span and longevity to company span
Totally,
and company longevity. And I guess it's the same analogy as you've quite rightly suggested. How do we create a sustainable solution for our companies and support them through the difficult parts of it, the highs and lows? We're all going to face challenges. And actually, how do we make sure that we build a companies that will outlast either of us in the long term, for example? So that is, I think, a better approach for us. It's not the short-termism, it's not medium-termism, it's that long-term approach, which is often missing because people look for a quick buck, quick turnaround. And I get that. I'm sure we'll make a lot of money for our investors, for us and the companies, but actually it's about sustainability. Healthcare deserves sustainable solutions. We've seen, one of the other things we share in common is our passion for traveling. And we often compete with how many countries we've been to each other. I think Fred's winning on that one, right? I've got a few more to go to catch up Fred. But what the traveling teaches us around the world and healthcare systems is systems are fragmented. Healthcare, I think, is almost broken in many places, part of the world. It's there's so much inequality. So if we create a sustainable solution that can be deployed not just in Central Europe, but scaled across the globe, whether it's Africa or other parts of the world that have low resource settings, that make a lot of sense for us to have that global impact. And so I love that idea and that shared compassion between Fred and I. We share a common purpose in that sense, and we share common values. I think what Fred's done also, which I think is important to illustrate, is the team that they create around you. It's not just about Fred and I. We're just part and parcel of one part of HealthTech. It's people like you, Rado. It's people that we saw today and yesterday who we met for the first time, the entire board, who are absolutely exceptional. And I've been so impressed with the way Fred has picked the right people. Spent a year, so it hasn't been overnight. You've both selected people on basis of what they offer, the experience, and meeting them over the last couple of days has really inspired me, thinking, wow, this could be something amazing. The right people with the right approach, the right mentality and experience they bring together, I think is unique in the sense of these kind of funds. So well done, Fred and Rado. And I'm really excited to see how that team gels going further forward to support those companies that we've described.
Let me maybe transition naturally to the evolution to fund to PT Capital, right? Because fund 2 PT Capital isn't just fund 1 purpose tech with more capital, right? It's fundamentally a different architecture. And let me maybe double down on what has been said here, right? So whereas VC optimizes for speed, momentum, and super aggressive growth, healthcare is fundamentally different, right? It optimizes for safety, evidence, adoption, friction, and those are very different clocks. And so does the architecture for Fund 2 for PT Capital has to be fundamentally different, right? So maybe let's get concrete now. So we've explored the rationale. Now maybe let's dive into the structure, right? So in like very simple terms, how would you articulate the thesis of PT Capital, Fred?
So the thesis of PT Capital is that we want to build a portfolio of niche, profitable health tech companies across the region. Right? Very simple. So there's a couple of things that we will prioritize for. Right. So the first part is the profitability part. Right. Because in venture capital, you would be growing through raising more and more money, right? Every 18 to 24 months, the company would raise next round of funding. And ultimately, you are trying to get to a stage where, of course, you do break even, maybe in 5-6 years' time. And then, of course, you have to turn profitable at some point of time, right? But you have to be able to go along this hockey stick as a company to be able to raise the money, right? And when anything breaks in that journey in the first 6-8 years, then you might not raise more capital, and then either things become very difficult for the founders, or in many cases the company dies, right? Because the company is burning by design, by definition, is burning more money than it's generating, right? So this is what does not work in healthcare, as we discussed. But having said that, we still need to make sure that there is sustainability, right? That the company, even if it's not raising money, that it can survive. So the company has to survive by being profitable. And it's a little funny to say that, right? Because when we look at the economy, 98+% of companies operate under those principles. But for obvious and good reasons in tech, this has not become the norm, right? So the norm in tech is that you raise money, you burn money, you try to kind of make it big, or you go home, you go bust, right? And again, with healthcare, this is difficult, right? Because it takes time, it takes relationships, it takes credibility to kind of get there. So we want to optimize for profitability. So one of the things we look for is we want to give the companies the first round and the last round. This is also a strategy called C-strapping. So it has been, in the mainstream conversations for the past maybe 2 years. So you raise one round of funding, and the main purpose of that round is that you break even, right? Because what's the alternative? The alternative. So we're now talking to many of the companies out of the 200 that we have seen. The alternative is that they have been bootstrapping, right? So they have usually kept their jobs. They are kind of doing this on the evenings, on the weekends, and slowly they're getting there. Of course, many might not make it for many reasons. Some of them, they raised angel rounds, right? Because angels, they look slightly differently at the returns, etc. But vast majority has been kind of struggling through, right? So we want to come in, we want to provide this initial round of funding, probably less than €1 million. And then in 2 to 3 years, we want to see clear path how they will break even, right? And this is also what the founders should optimize for, and understand that this is critical to their survival, that they break even. Because if they will not break even, they will need to raise more money. Probably they won't, because there is not many funds like us. The whole financial mathematics would not work. So that's one of the key things we want to optimize for. And maybe the second critical point is the type of markets we want to go after, right? Because when you are an entrepreneur going after a very large market, you can probably, if you're good enough and if your vision and concept is strong enough, you can probably raise venture capital, because venture capital requires that the markets are at least $1 billion plus, right? Nowadays, maybe even more. But we want to go after markets that by design are not attractive to VCs, right? So that are small, that are maybe, as I mentioned, tens of millions, hundreds of millions. The whole logic behind that is that when this company will manage to take over that market, maybe control 10, 20, but maybe even more % of the market, it's too small for the VC-backed startups, for the large corporates to go in, but it is super interesting and lucrative for that company operating in that market, right? Because if you control a market of 50 to 100 million euros, you're generating 10, 50 millions of euros, you're profitable 20, 30%. That's amazing business, right? Like, this is really good business, and there will be very few competitors entering that market, because why would they bother, right? Why would they go against a very strong competitor in the market, entrenched
and that's more realistic, Fred, isn't it? Realistic.
Yes.
If you look at healthcare, you talk about unicorns, we talk about the big players, and the news is filtered with those kind of people, right? Hey, they've gone big, they raised a lot of money, gets a lot of noise, a lot of attention, but they can't scale that quickly, because you said the question was about profitability, bringing some traction, having a market to penetrate, for example. And what we're thinking of actually is much more sensible. It's a realistic proposition that helps us, helps investors, and helps the companies to understand where they are. So I think it's that perfect model. And having been in the system like you, seeing people try and scale much quicker, much faster, the aggressive nature, the sheer pressure on these companies to deliver, and actually the market is not ready for them, or it's not big enough, it's not fast enough, and they suffer. We all know stories of companies that have tried that method, and I agree with you, it doesn't work. You might get lucky, one in so many, and you might hit that target. But that's not what we're here for. We're here for sustainable solutions of healthcare. Our remit, our responsibility is to our patients, is to healthcare systems, to build things responsibly. And that's the message I like to get to our investors and people who work with us. We're responsible. we're supporting. We've been in healthcare for a long while. We have a long-term vision here to improve health of people. And that's where you do that, to have solutions that are sustainable, long-term, and will have the impact that we both and everyone else that we work with want to see.
Yeah, Shafi, I think this is a perfect leeway to actually shift into your clinical perspective, right? Because I feel like timing and tailwinds matter when it comes to this market. So I was wondering, from your perspective, what are the broader market, regulatory, or like systemic healthcare forces that are sort of strengthening this opportunity?
Yeah, it's a great question, Rado. It's one that I spend my life going around the world talking to people about my kind of insights into the world of medicine and the future. They call me a futurist for some unknown reason. However, if I talk about the 5 biggest trends in healthcare at the moment that we've been discussing for a while, they're fascinating. And I'll share those with you and the audience here, of course. If you look at one of them, it's my world of surgery and the concept of digital surgery. So what we're seeing is surgical practice moving from AI to, from analog to digital. What does that mean? We have robots, for example, globally. There are now, so in the year 2000, there's one surgical robot, Intuitive Da Vinci. Today, 25 years later, there are 120 comes out there building surgical robots. So that's automating our work, improving access. That produces data. We're now seeing AI within the operating theatre. From perspective of intraoperatively and outside the operative field, improving efficiencies. We're seeing the world of extended reality, VR training, simulation, for example, and capturing more and more data to allow us to be more precise as surgeons. So we're now having surgical navigation supporting us in the operation, both pre and post-op. That is really exciting. And this first time in my life, as 32 years as a doctor, I'm seeing we're now embracing digital surgical practices. Next one I'll allude to is the world of wearable sensors and personalized data. You saw the Oura Ring now have sold over 6 million rings globally. We've seen other competitors with the Hoop bands and others all collecting data. So we are now seeing personalized medicine take its hold. And therefore, it's how do you capture data? How do you empower patients with their data? How do you take patients from sick care to well care, to manage their conditions? We know the burden of health is made with chronic diseases. We know that, right? And in fact, 70% of any budget in healthcare goes to manage chronic diseases like diabetes, like asthma, and other neurological problems. So the movement has to be into that area, from secondary care to primary care to prevention and personalised care. We know that, and that's coming. People talk about the 3 shifts in medicine, especially in the UK. We go from analog to digital, from secondary care, hospitals, to community care, empowering patients better in the community. And thirdly, we talk about sick care to well care, keeping people healthier for longer. The other concept, of course, genomics and predictive analysis and predictive healthcare is huge. Longevity and health span is now taking its traction. And of course, no conversation will be complete without talking about AI. AI in healthcare is huge. Healthcare is the one vertical where AI seems to have most traction in terms of patient-facing AI, chatbots, LLMs, information, conversation engines, behavioral change, CBT therapy, for example. From the automation side, the back end of electronic health record, we see a lot of companies now use AI to automate systems, for example. And thirdly, it's around the diagnostics. So I've just given you a flavour of how excited I am of medicine in 2025 compared to 20 years ago. I always say to my colleagues and audiences around the world, this is simply the most exciting time to be alive in medicine. Not 5 years ago, not 10 years ago, but today, because the opportunity for change, the opportunity to reimagine and reinvent, redesign healthcare has never been greater.
That's
May I
super.
add one more thought? Yeah,
Of course.
Totally agree. There is one more thing that I'm personally, from a company builder perspective, super excited about, and that is the use of AI to build products and solutions, right? Because there is a relationship between the market size, how much money you can raise, right, and then what opportunities you can actually pursue, right? So historically, when it would have taken hundreds of thousands, probably millions or tens of millions of euros to build a product and solution, of course you have to raise money for that. And for this money to be kind of aligned with the risk, of course there has to be a huge upside, right? So that's also why I spoke about that the markets have to be in the billions of euros previously, historically, for startups, even nowadays, to raise this amount of money, right? But what is changing is now we have those tools that we can now use. There's all this talk about, these solopreneurs, right? The billion-dollar companies started and run by, a person or a few people with, all the... And I think this is unlocking so many of those smaller niche markets in healthcare that were traditionally impossible to build for, right? Because how do you build for a market that is small when you cannot raise the money because of the size of the opportunity? But now, if you can build with tens of thousands of euros or maybe hundreds of thousands of euros, what costed you previously millions of euros, we will see those entrepreneurs, those new people coming in, building for those small markets because suddenly they can, right? Because it is possible and it is financially viable. The business model works out. So this is also why I'm super excited, right? About, as you said, this is very exciting time. So the ability to build with a fraction of a cost and to roll out solutions in weeks and start generating money, this is exciting. And in healthcare, particularly like preventive care and all the health span related activities, totally exciting. I think we'll see so many of those.
You're absolutely right, Fred. I think you've hit the nail on the head in the sense that it takes a small amount of capital to go much further now. As you mentioned before, you have to raise a lot of money to build the infrastructure, to build the systems in place. Now, a small amount of capital, actually, companies now can go much faster, much quicker, build the infrastructure, and then deploy as they wish. So I think the model of huge investments going in are no longer necessary, as you just suggested, because AI platforms are much easier. Take ambient AI or agentic AI. You can build ambient AI for almost nothing at all. It's very, very cheap and easy, right? You can build an agentic AI, again, literally from the bits and pieces that connect together that you can get hold of. That cost is so low at the moment. So we should take advantage of that. And so I think Purpose Tech and its purpose of why it's doing it is almost perfectly aligned to the current market forces, okay? And others need to change their model. So actually, can we do it better, easier, faster, smaller amount of capital at the beginning, supporting businesses? So I think the conversation should change, as you say, from the capital, because it's going to be easier to support companies, to nurturing them to find the market share and to penetrate and to find the use cases, yeah? People often talk about the technologies, and I mentioned technologies earlier. What I don't want to say is technologies are being the answer. We have to find the challenges facing healthcare. We mentioned the other day, we have to go to healthcare systems, ask them, what are the challenges you're facing? How can we help you? Can we find solutions out there already that would fit into your challenges? Not saying, here we have a solution, how do we fit it into your system? That doesn't work, never works. It's like putting a wooden peg into a round hole. It's the other way around. We are being responsible, asking what challenges they're facing and how can we solve those problems with what we're doing at Purpose Tech.
Let's maybe change the lens for a moment and discuss why PT Capital is a strong opportunity from the LP angle, right? So I'm sure that the LPs have been waiting for this very impatiently and nervously until we unpack this topic as well. So Fred, where do you see the return generating potential coming from in this model?
I think one of the key things I'm super excited about is back to the real cash and the real profits, right? Because as I mentioned, we want to optimize for path to profitability, which also means that we will be sitting on a portfolio of companies that generate real cash, right? So we're assuming for the portfolio of about 10 to 15 companies in 8 years' time after the investment, we should have about 3 to 5 mil euros in free cash flow, right? This is like real money that is flowing in and that will be flowing in to our investors. We will return almost the entire fund through dividends only, right? Because when the companies become profitable in 2-3 years, they can start paying us either a dividend or maybe an interest rate on the loan/investment that we provide. So we can start distributing those early returns. Nowadays, when we look at the landscape, there is no liquidity. There is very few exits, right? There is very few returns. Everybody talks, 10x, 20x funds, but there are no outcomes like that. And the question is, will there be such outcomes when it comes to healthcare as such, right? I think we will certainly see very large, global, huge outcomes in healthcare, but I think those will be very, very rare. And I think what we need as well is just to make sure that we cover the problems that the systems are facing, right? But those companies can come in, they can start generating revenues, and then we can start distributing those returns to our customers, right? To our LPs. So that's one of the exciting things, right? And then what we're essentially trying to do is almost to build a platform, right? That will have a couple of topics that we'll focus on. It will be very much around preventive care, health span, longevity in different shapes or forms, and find ways how this group of companies can be synergetic, right? So the long-term vision for PT Capital is to be almost this holding company, right? That in maybe 15, 20 years will be one of the largest players in the region when it comes to preventive care, right? And it might include clinics as well. It will include, of course, a lot of digital tools, different scenarios, but just to make sure that we are providing that care, that we're growing profitably, because there's no other way. And then, of course, that our investors are participating in the upsides. So that's one of the key things that I think it's like super interesting. Also from my point of view, right? I also want to build a company, if we call it a fund or not, that will be here in 10, 15, 20 years time. Not just a fund, that every, 2, 3, 4 years has to raise new amount of money, right? So that's kind of the approach that we have in mind.
Yeah, and I think one thing you mentioned there was synergy. And of course, one thing we are keen on is choosing companies that we think align to our mission. Also that could work together as a kind of bringing in ideas that one can reflect on the other and have a network so they can actually work together almost. And I think that's going to be a key role for us going forward, and how we impact health. But I think the thing you mentioned about prevention is crucial also. I think one of our key elements is how do we make health better for more people, right? And prevention is the key. And to think about personalised healthcare that's data-driven makes sense to me. And a lot of the companies that we've seen already are having that shared common purpose. Because obviously we have to reduce the burden of, it's not just about a company bringing revenue, it's how do you also reduce the burden of cost globally. If you look at healthcare costs at the moment, they're going year on year. GDP goes up, a more elderly population with more chronic diseases and more comorbidity. It's unsustainable. So the mission that we also have, of course, is how do we reduce the cost burden to healthcare systems, to governments, to people that can't afford it. So actually the synergy will be around that as well. And as I mentioned before earlier, it's about sustainable solutions. I think as long as we stick to those ideas, we won't go too far wrong, because the world's a big marketplace for that kind of thinking.
Totally. Because the question is timing, right? Like when we look at the healthcare system, and I'm sure we have a number of interesting insights to share, right? But the system it's under huge strain, right? We can almost say that if we have, like in the UK, right, as we discussed yesterday, if we have 10% of the population on waiting list, is this a healthcare system that works, or is this a healthcare system that is collapsing? And how do we crack that, right? How do we crack the fact that we are living longer, but we are not getting healthier? That we still expect more from the healthcare system, but at the same time, there is less money in the healthcare systems. There is less and less people that operate the system. There is more strain on them, right? So we have all those forces, and I think the only answer to that is through technology, right? How do we enable the doctors, the nurses to do at least as good job for more people, ideally better job for more people in the systems, right? So I think the regulation, we see already signs that this is changing. There is a lot of changes happening in that regard.
Yeah, and I think part of our mission is also to persuade people to think differently. Okay, because we get stuck in our ways in healthcare, and doctors, nurses, and healthcare professionals are the most resistant to change, in my experience. They're the most difficult people to work with because they do things the same way as they have done before, and it becomes very traditional. So part of the agenda with us is about change management. How do we support our companies to change people's behavior, to change people's perceptions, and to think outside the box of what could be done differently? And you've alluded to the problems already. The challenges facing us are reduced costs, a cost burden, increasing comorbidity, increasing age, a workforce that's not fit for purpose at the moment because there's a lack of workforce globally. So these are issues that aren't going away. There's no secrets here. Everyone knows they exist in every country in the world. And I think part of our mission is to persuade and re-energize people to think, could we do it differently? Could we repurpose those resources? Can we support companies that we will support in the fund? Also, with our network, building capabilities for deployment. And that's part of our mission. We have a huge network, of course, globally, hospital systems, governments, etc., who could tap into to allow them to use our technologies, our solutions, much faster into clinical practice to showcase either pilots or real-world evidence. That's what we're interested in, because we can then demonstrate that by our funding, our support, we're demonstrating outcomes that are better, or a system that's using resources much better is more efficient. That's our metrics of success in the impact it has on the patients that we serve.
I almost feel sorry to be forced to drift away, from this conversation, because I find it intriguing as well. But another one of the topics that I think of is actually the sourcing or the deal flow, right? Which is one of my favorite topics and arguably one of the most interesting topics in early stage investing as well. Because everyone claims that they have proprietary deal flow, right? And whereas like most of the time it means, I got this deal from someone I met at the conference or something like that. So I was wondering, how will you source deals in PT Capital in like a differentiated, repeatable way?
Yeah. No, that's the billion-dollar question, right? So, the main, the whole insight that our second fund is built on is what we now see in the market, right? So we have been, as I mentioned, looking at over 1,000 deals every year. Vast majority of them are in HealthTech, and we see those companies, right? Already, we saw close to 200 companies that are in the scope of what we would like to now invest with the fund 2, because we designed the fund 2 to be able to invest into those companies, right? So we, at the beginning, will continue doing the same things that we have been doing now, sourcing, right? So there is a couple of channels that we use. We go to conferences, we have inbound traffic, right? Because we are one of the few funds that is specialized in the field in our region. So we will continue doing what we're doing right now. I think this will enable us to the first number of investments, and I think as a to some extent a newer strategy, we'll also explore other ways how we can source. Right, we're kind of exploring the idea of potentially looking for existing micro enterprises in particular fields. Right, so like doctors, medical practitioners that are now have their small business, right? Maybe it's digital. Ideally, it should be digital, right? And then help them scale, because there are some areas that are becoming more open, right? Because maybe the out-of-pocket payments are more going in a direction. Maybe the regulation is changing there, right? So we have identified a number of those fields where we see potential. So, and we can go after those people and say, hey, how about we find ways how we can scale that, right? And secondly is that there are clearly opportunities that are opening up, right? And I think we are able to find the right people to kind of fit them with the right clinical expertise, with the right medical expertise, and then kind of shape them to be able to build the businesses in those areas, right? Because one of the things that I have not mentioned, which I think is important, is that for us, a successful outcome that enables us to roughly 4x the fund, which is very, very interesting, kind of at par with, actually not at par with what many of the venture capital funds reach, right? Many of them reach much less, of course. But our successful outcome is a company that generates about 4 million euros in revenues. 4 million euros. That's not huge, right? And profitable 20-30% in 8 years' time, right? So if we can find and back those companies, that will allow us to reach the numbers that we want, right? So I think there is 2, 3, 4 different ways how we can explore new ways of sourcing. But we clearly see in the market where we have been now for 3 years with the Fund 1 that this is what's happening, and we can invest. We're now in the process of discussing with a couple of companies warehousing a couple of deals already, because this is what we see in the market.
Yep. And there's huge inbound. You mentioned you seeing hundreds of companies per year that have ideas and solutions. So how do we filter some of those? The other thing I think that we might offer, in addition just to for the funds, is central functions. A lot of these companies require HR support. A lot of companies require grant writing support. A lot of them require additional legal expenses, for example. So I think if we're very smart, a lot of these functions could be placed centrally within Purpose Tech, supporting them through a joint venture, so that we reinvest in those people, support them through the things that we've seen as entrepreneurs that are difficult. Because when you have costs that accumulate, there are other costs that are kind of unintended or unseen, for example, and how do we support that? So our role is also to be holistic in our approach, to let founders understand the complexities of building businesses. It's not just about the idea, it's the things that go around it. Even, for example, clinical trials and research. How do we facilitate that? Because most of these ideas would require some patients ultimately to benefit from that solution. So we'd open that up to them, support them through that, the regulatory pathway, perhaps the patent pathway, perhaps the research and trials. Say, hey, this is part and parcel of your journey. So I think what we bring to the table with the medical expertise and, of course, from the financial perspective, is a much more holistic approach of understanding in healthcare, which is heavily nuanced compared to other verticals, and understanding how to succeed and find that traction and find that kind of the journey into the difficult world of healthcare deployment. But I think that's the other thing that we'll add value to.
Totally. Maybe I will double click on that, because we didn't touch upon that, and I think that's a great point, Shafi. Thanks for that. So we have about 10% of the fund is earmarked for exactly these purposes, right? So one of the challenges that we have been now facing with our portfolio is that we, of course, provide advice to the founders, the best advice that we can, but how much is it worth, right? So we basically tell the founders, hey, this is what you should do, and good luck, right? It's very difficult for them to understand our buy-in, right? So I think that's why it was very critical from my point of view now to have funding available in the fund that we can allocate, and we can not just say, hey, we see this in the market, there is an opportunity that you should go after, but we can go after it together, right? So what we want to do is, whenever the portfolio will be shaping up, we'll see the needs, we'll see the synergies, we can go to our investment committee and say, hey, we would now like to commit maybe 100, 200K, and together with our portfolio companies, which will participate, they will co-invest, actually build a solution that will help, right? As you said, when it comes to optimizing how we go after the particular markets, there can be, regulatory approvals, there can be different aspects connected to how we get non-dilutive funding, etc., right? So we simply need to have that vehicle to be able to commit, right? So we don't just give advice, but we say, hey, we really believe in this. We'll put a few of our guys and girls on the team, and let's do this together. Because again, the whole idea is we're building a portfolio, right? It's not about, funding 15 companies and then expecting 14 will die, but about 90% of our returns from the fund will be created by 50% of the portfolio, right? So we expect that all the companies will contribute to the bottom line, right? Not that they will die out. Coming back to longevity of the companies, right? And the sustainability that is required.
So there's one more question, Shafi, that I wanted us to tackle from a different point of view of what we discussed up to this point, which would be, what would be some of the themes, topics, and opportunities within the broader health tech market that you're the most excited about?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And as I think about it, there's two parts that answer, if I'm honest. The first part is defining what the challenges facing healthcare is at the moment, the pressing needs. And I've mentioned earlier, one is a huge problem with healthcare workforce, which is not enough for every country in the world. It's a universal problem. So that's one. Secondly, it's about the management of chronic diseases, management of personalized care that's data-driven to make patients better at home in the community. I haven't talked about this concept of not the hospital anymore, but something I call the hospital, care in the house. How do we take care? That's much more affordable. Huge opportunity. And it's an unmet need, if you like. And the other one, of course, is around, I guess, it's the automation, the collecting of data, electronic health record, the automation process sitting behind systems to allow us to work much more efficiently. So first we define the challenges facing healthcare, which are universal. Well, next, what are the key solutions? It's exciting, right? I mentioned earlier, but all the technologies that are coming to play together, whether it's AI, whether it's genomics, whether it's the concept of health span longevity, whether it's the wearable sensors and things that we're creating to allow us to treat patients in a much better fashion. So my belief always is, how do we make patients better for longer in their own environment? Preventing complications, preventing hospital admissions. If you have to go to hospital, the question is, how do we make that better? How do we optimize healthcare? How do we make the post-op care better for patients? Can we use AI? Can we use chatbots, LLMs? Can we use agentic AI to allow us to shape that conversation? So I think the solutions are there already. I just think is, how do we utilize them in a way that's measurable and also deployable into systems, but also acceptable to healthcare fraternity? Is two parts of that conversation. It's not just wedging something in, is, hey, let's have those conversations with the right people. How can we help support, optimize their systems? And these are technologies that our companies, we can support them. So the question is much more broader. To understand the challenges, I think that's where we differ from most companies. Being in healthcare for 32 years, we understand the challenges. And then we have the other side, those tech solutions that we think might fit in, dovetail to some of those challenges, because that's where you get penetration, that's where you get deployment, that's where you get buy-in from hospital systems and clinicians.
So this has been like a deeply thoughtful conversation. What stands out to me is the coherence of your partnership, really, and I think that also learnings from Purpose Tech, from Fund One, and how you actually integrate them into setting up the architecture for PT Capital. So Fred, Shafi, thank you very much, and to everyone listening, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Rado.
Thank you, Rado.